Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov lies regularly, and with things that are demonstrably true, he'll say they're false. So, for example, this was just today. The Russian army never strikes civilian targets. Go to any one of my daily briefs and you will see the Russian army striking civilian targets. I mean, any day of the week, you can see that. Like, it's documented. Or this little gem. Ukraine is the only country that has banned a foreign language. There is no other language that is legally banned in any country. Hebrew is not banned in the Palestinian Authority territories or Arab countries. Arabic is not banned in Israel, but Russian is banned in Ukraine. So draw your own conclusions. Okay, so now you can look at that and say, oh, that sounds terrible. But is it even true? Well, the claim's misleading. Ukraine has not banned Russian. It has prioritized Ukrainian as the sole state language. Many countries have a sole state language, and that's not uncommon anywhere around the world. You don't get penalized for speaking Russia. In Ukraine, there's no legal persecution for that. But they're using this to say, hey, we have to protect these Russians who are being persecuted because of this. We'll come back to that at the very end of this video. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. Meanwhile, other Russian or propagandists are saying Ukraine's not even a real state. Listen to this.
So Alexander Guerrero is an international law analyst and researcher now joining us here in the studio at the RT Moscow headquarters. Great to have you on the program. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you here as well in Moscow.
It's great to have you here, my friend. Let's talk about this statement from the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, not pulling any punches right there. But why do you think, Alexander, from your perspective, the European Union, according to Lavrov, cannot have a seat at the negotiating table?
First, let's clarify one thing. Ukraine is not an independent and a sovereign country.
Okay, stop. He's making an assertion. You have to prove that that's true if you're going to make the assertion, and he's not going to do that. He's just going to make the assertion and move on.
I think it's end of discussion. In the year of 2025, it should be a clear idea that everyone should have in mind, which means that Ukraine is under the protectorate of the European Union. And basically, what Minister Lavrov wants is to negotiate directly with Ukraine without the European Union always trying to put its own geopolitical interests first and above what Ukrainian people really wants.
Of course he doesn't want to negotiate with the EU. They're the most hawkish. The United States is all but sitting on the sidelines, and so he wants them out. And he's trying to split the difference and say, see, the EU has different interests than the people of Ukraine, who aren't actually a part of a actual people group because they're not really Ukrainians because it's not a real state.
So this can be a condition, and this should be a condition to start real negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. First, represent the real opinion and will of the Ukrainian people.
The real Ukrainians who don't actually exist. Okay, it's fascinating. Now, what was the response from the West? It was tepid at best. Here's the Secretary General of the United Nations saying this. Of course, he's not. While Lavrov is saying that they're holding up the UN Charter and it's Ukrainians violating it, this is what the Secretary General is saying. Our position is very clear. We need an immediate ceasefire, but a ceasefire that leads to a solution based on the UN Charter, which he doesn't say Russia is wantonly violating in international law and the resolutions of the General Assembly. The positions of both sides are now largely incompatible. After Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have seen that the Russian Federation has resisted strongly the idea of a ceasefire and saying that the global agreement is necessary, and we all know how difficult it is to achieve. So I'm afraid we might witness this war go on, at least for some time, and to go on now with violence that is particularly dramatic because it's having a huge impact on civilians, which is absolutely regrettable. Well, it's regrettable, but it's the Russians that are violating international law. It's the Russians that are destroying the international charter. Don't let them hide behind this. He goes on and concludes, I am not optimistic at the short term because I see the positions of the two sides very different, very different. I believe that Ukraine has a legitimate interest to preserve its territorial integrity. That's good. And it's clear that Russia is determined to do something that would mean the occupation of large parts of Ukraine. No, let me rewrite that last little bit. And it's clear that the Russians are doing something that's undermining the UN Charter, international law, and everything that we understand about the international order. And they're the violators, and they should be stopped. That's where he needs to go, but he won't. The West just doesn't seem to want to do it. Meanwhile, Putin is visiting the Russian-Belarus Zapad 2025 military drills in the Nizhitsky Novgorod region amid military provocations and heightened NATO fears. Now, he was saying that there's 100,000 military personnel and 10,000 units of equipment in Belarus. That sounds awfully high. Darth Putin says divide these numbers by at least 10. I don't think it's quite that much, but I don't think there's 100,000 there. Putin announced this during the closing of the military exercises Zapad 2025. Russian military bloggers aren't really excited about these exercises. They said the military exercises come in for bitter criticism from Russian war bloggers as being a circus performance and blank. I'm not going to say what that is, or I just try not to use profanity here. This ignores the lessons of the war in Ukraine and showcases irrelevant capabilities. Like, there are capabilities that you have to employ now that you could have employed 3 years ago that you can no longer do because of drone warfare and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Alexei Navalny, says this: we managed to transfer Alexei's biological materials abroad. Laboratories in 2 different countries conducted examinations. These laboratories, independently of each other, concluded that Alexei was poisoned. Well, no duh. I mean, everybody knew this. It was just they're finally getting the evidence of it. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Navalny. I don't think Navalny would do a lot for Ukraine. His widow certainly seems to think like there are good Russians everywhere that would not be doing this, but don't persecute the good Russians. But yeah, what Putin did to Navalny was wrong. Meanwhile, Dmitry Kozak is the only senior Kremlin figure who opposed the war early on in the war. Like Putin held it pretty close to his chest. This is the only guy who opposed it. He resigned as deputy head of Putin's administration. That's unfortunate. You want to have somebody saying like, hey, like, this isn't a good idea. We got to stop this. Kozak tried to dissuade Putin from the full-scale invasion in 2022, and this year proposed peace talks with Kyiv. He's no longer in Putin's inner circle. And Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko continues to rhetorically distance himself from Russia in Russia's recent incursion into the Polish airspace in an attempt to obfuscate the fact that Belarus is de facto a co-belligerent in Russia's war against Ukraine. This is according to the Institute for the Study of War. You can say things all you want, but what you actually do is what we need to look at. Now, let's look at the other side of this equation, not just what's going on in Russia, but Zelensky and the United States, and then in Europe. Zelensky confirmed the approval of the first U.S. military packages under the PURL program. The packages include missiles for Patriot and HIMARS. PURL allows NATO countries to purchase U.S. weapons for Ukraine. The U.S. has resumed major weapon shipments to Ukraine. This time, European nations are paying the bills. According to Reuters, the Pentagon approved up to $1 billion. That's 2 $500 million arms packages that included air defense systems for Ukraine that they urgently needed in order to fend off all these drone and missile attacks. This is a great thing. Ukraine has already received over $2 billion from partners. It'll be up to $3.5 or $3.6 billion by October. The first 2 packages include Patriot and HIMARS. And then on top of that, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation has made a $75 million commitment to the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Under the minerals deal, Ukraine will match the contribution with initial focus on energy infrastructure and critical minerals projects. Okay, with both those 2 stories, I say they're a zag. I know some of you will say, no, they never zag. You know, Trump administration never zags. No, there's a little zag. It's a little zag. 95+% of the time zig. 95% of the time it's a zag toward Russia. Here's a little bit going toward pro-Ukraine. Well, maybe Trump doesn't mean it. It doesn't matter if he means it or if he wants to do it. He's doing something that's benefiting Ukraine, even if it's through selling things through Europe, because Europe's buying it. And this is a fair point here. I saw this comment. The media appears to be describing 2 approved arms sales to Ukraine as aid. That's misleading. If I go to lunch with a friend and he pays, the restaurant hasn't provided aid. It has provided a paid service. If Europe is purchasing weapons for Ukraine, that's not aid. Well, okay, aid, it's still aid in the sense that it's coming from somewhere else to Ukraine, but the Europeans are paying for it. That's quite clear. That's very fair. But Ukraine's getting it. That's the point, and that's what we need to be focused on. Okay, frustrated GOP senators blow steam on Russia. Sick of Trump. Vance, love affair with Putin. So here, if we go into the article, it's kind of interesting. Senate Republicans are growing increasingly exasperated over President Trump's refusal to give them permission to move tough bipartisan sanctions legislation against Russia and countries that buy its oil. You don't need permission, senators. I give you permission as a citizen. You're a co-equal, that's the same meaning, branch of the U.S. government. And so you can do that. Now, they're afraid that Trump will attack them in social media or otherwise if they go against him. So that's what they're worried about. The failure to act is fueling growing disillusionment among some Senate Republicans that Trump is not serious about helping Ukraine. One Republican, now this was amazingly interesting, one Republican senator who requested anonymity to comment candidly on the stalemate over the sanctions legislation questioned whether Trump would ever come around to backing more military aid to Ukraine or slapping harsh sanctions on Russia. Why is a senator requesting anonymity? Because he doesn't want to get Trump's wrath and get him to use his social media to stick it to this senator. I'm sick of Trump and JD and their love affair with everything Putin, the senator grumbled. Wow, how about that? A second Republican senator who also requested anonymity observed that Trump has occasionally talked tough about Russia, but has failed to follow through with action. Trump gave the hawks on Capitol Hill some hope when he declared, "We get a lot of BS thrown at us by Putin. If you want to know the truth, remember that." But it all turned out to be meaningless. And then Trump gave Putin a warm reception in Alaska. So Republican senators are sick of this as well, but they're not doing anything about it. They need to step up and do something. Meanwhile, Europe and the U.S. need to stop thinking about themselves, says Zelensky, and their future relations with Russia and start thinking more about Ukraine. That's a sticking point. They're thinking about the future. Some European countries are doing that and thinking, well, the deals that we're going to have with Russia, what about that? Every day of their bargaining over what sanctions to impose costs on many lives. It's not fair. It's really not fair. At the same time, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says, I passed the course. Von der Leyen says that she had a fruitful call with Trump on ramping up joint economic pressure on Russia. She confirmed the 19th sanctions package will soon target crypto, banking, and energy while accelerating EU's phase out of Russian fossil fuels. And if we want to look at what happened with Russian fossil fuels, Branislav Slantchev posted this, and this is Russian fossil fuels. If you look at the blue, that's the EU. The EU is largely taking in Russian oil and gas and that sort of thing. And it's now down to a kind of a trickle. Meanwhile, China has grown a sum, not amazingly, but maybe by, went to time and a half or so. And then Turkey has grown maybe time and a half, not quite time and a half. And then South Korea has diminished, as has the EU. And there's India has grown wildly from 29,000 to 345,000. They're just soaking up all the oil they can. Okay, what else is going on in Europe? Denmark bypassed laws under national security exemption in a rush to build Flamingo missile fuel plant for Ukraine. So that's going to be very helpful. I haven't seen much of the Flamingo missiles yet. I don't think they're as exciting as everybody has said, at least not yet. We'll see how this comes over time. Now, this was interesting. It's not only Czechia that's now in love with the Russian world. There's the Russian pro-Russian party is polling #1 here this is in Austria. Like it's like a virus that's infecting multiple places in Europe. Okay, Gabriel Landsbergis, he's the former foreign minister from Lithuania. He said something really interesting. Let's drop the naivety and accept that this war will end on the battlefield after Ukraine achieves necessary military strength, not in a conference room after a round of talks and a carafe of wine. Now, that's an interesting thought because generally speaking, we assume that it can't be won on the battlefield. And so you're not going to win it on the battlefield if you're making those kinds of assumptions. He's taking the opposite tack, which I thought was interesting. This from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. This is the first time that we've seen such a description of children involved in making devices for military operations. Yes, Ukrainians that had been deported that are now making drones and things like that for the Russians. It's absolutely disgusting. evidence has been found for the first time that abducted Ukrainian children were used by Russia to assemble military equipment. Raymond said that his team had seen Russian government documents which detailed how children aged 13 to 17 were given class on assembling drones and other military equipment in April last year. Now, it's not all bad news. 16 Ukrainian children were freed from occupied territories. One of them, a 15-year-old girl, and her parents spent nearly 3 years barely leaving their home, living in constant fear that the occupiers could knock on their door and take the children. So, all right, last little bit. On this day in 1939, shortly after partnering with Nazi Germany, the USSR invaded Poland under the guise of protecting the Russian minority. Doesn't that sound familiar? Almost like Lavrov was talking about that today, protecting the Russian speakers. On 17 September 1939, Soviet Union joined World War II on the side of Nazi Germany by invading Poland. This attack marked the beginning of the Soviet annexation of Western Ukrainian land, setting the stage for the formation of Ukrainian insurgent army, which fought against occupation. Well, they'd just been through a Holodomor. I can't blame them. On this day in 1939, Poland, as a complete surprise to us, says Darth Putin, as a complete surprise to us, suddenly ceased to exist. So Soviets launched a special military operation to protect our compatriots abroad. Definitely not an invasion. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for your time and the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.